All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to have you all here, and good morning to all of you on the spiritual plan as well. And as always, we're here together to have a lecture. Today, we're going to be talking about Jesus, and we're going to have a lecture by our friend Tiago. But as always, before we start our lecture, we're going to have our friend Tiago as well. This Tiago Maior, Tiago Menor, doing our initial reading and our initial prayer.
Good morning, everyone. The message today comes from the book Happy Life by Joana de Angelis, psychography of Divaldo Franco. The opportunities for moral improvement that life allows us should be taken advantage of wisely and immediately. The march of time is inevitable, and an occasion neglected is lost forever. Time and wind never come back. Thus, it is a liberating blessing to utilize every opportunity for inner growth. Stay alert in order to take the most advantage of the hours of your earthly existence. And with that, let us close our eyes, keep our thoughts elevated to our Master Jesus, and be connected with the spiritual friends of this house, with the spiritual mentors. Let's us thank for this opportunity of being gathered here today for this purpose of reflecting and learning from your word, Jesus. May you guide our friend Tiago, who will give the lecture today. May be guided by our good spirits and spiritual friends. Thank you so much. Protect this house, protect our purpose and our task, and be with us today and always, and so be it.
Thank you, Tiago. Raquel, you call me old. I will remember that, okay? You call me old.
Old, I mean, because you're here since the beginning of TSS, and then his new version, because he started, like a year or two ago.
I would prefer to believe that version. That's okay.
That was the intent.
Okay.
I swear.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here in this beautiful but very snowy day. So brave are you that are here. And thank you, everybody that is on the internet today, live or in the future. That is time travel, right? I'm already talking to the people in the future, like, right? So today, the thing is Jesus, and talk about Jesus. I realize it's not an easy thing. It is at the same time very rewarding, because there is a very important reason why we talk about Jesus, and mainly it is the foundation and the reason why we all do what we do, why Spiritism exists. But at the same time, it is challenging. First of all, there is so much filter that I needed to put in 45 minutes. It's impossible to talk about Jesus after all. And trying to extract something, important, essential for you was really a challenge. But I hope that with that snippet of, information, and about Jesus, we are able to become curious. We are able to become more interested. We are able to, get to know more about this character for many, this important figure for others, and for us, to try to understand a little more the importance that Jesus has for all of us and for our planet, and the relevance that Jesus has for us today, and has always had that importance and that relevance. So, of course, that one of the first questions that I was asking myself, and I want to share with you, is who is Jesus after all? For many, Jesus, for some religions, especially Jesus was known to us in many ways, since the old times through religion, through scriptures, through word of mouth back in the day, of somebody that had lessons to give us and somehow challenged the status quo in the time. And there was lots of reference of somebody like Jesus, but not necessarily him, but somebody that one day will come and restore all things. Which things? Restore the truth about life, the meaning of it, the truth about why we go through in this life the way that we do. And is there a meaning for all of it? Jesus' entire story is actually a lesson for all of us. It doesn't matter where it comes from. The information that comes about Jesus is actually very coherent. If you think about the Muslims that talk about Jesus as a prophet, and actually other people that were around him, if you think about Christianity that presents Jesus in a way that is more known for many of us that are here right now, for the Jewish as well, Jesus does exist, but not necessarily in the same way that exists for us. Also, Jesus has many names, and many know Jesus from expressions like the King of Kings, the Messiah, the Christ. And the interesting thing is some of those words, they have a very interesting meaning, because Messiah or Christ, if you think about Christ, it is a Greek word. Messiah is a Hebrew word. It comes from the Hebrew. And both of them have the same meaning. It is the one who is anointed. An interesting thing about being anointed is there's two main purposes of anointment. One, it is anointing the ones that were noble, like the kings were anointed for celebration or for the recognition of their importance. And at the same time, there was the anointing, which is a process that was done for those who died. So it is interesting that even in those expressions, there is meaning that is very profound, because many of us still know Jesus on that man that died, that man that is represented on a cross. And so much of it was imprinted in our collective psyche. But we know that Jesus is way more than that. And hopefully the Spiritism, which is the key for the understanding of many of the parts of scriptures and many of our history, it is the key that gives us that essence and that understanding that is beyond the words. The Spiritism restores a lot of the spirit of those stories, because they have a meaning for us much greater than the meaning of simply opening a scripture and reading and learning about lessons for us to apply in our lives. And we're going to try to brush upon that a little bit. So we can start actually thinking about scriptures and thinking about how do we know about Jesus. Since the Old Testament, there are many people who were called the prophets. They would announce someone that would help the people who were suffering. A lot of the stories about somebody coming to enlighten the world, to take people from the darkness of the sufferings that they were going through, somehow start depicting that figure that is Jesus. And one of the greatest references of Jesus in the Bible, in the Old Testament, come from the book of Isaiah. This is a painting of the calling of Isaiah. I brought a little bit of art to help us, you know. So in the book of Isaiah, in the chapter 9, there is a few of the verses, and I brought some of them to help us understanding that how much Jesus was being taught to us, almost as a preparation for our psyche to welcome him. The preparation for the coming of Jesus took a very long time. If we look at life as more than that existence, and if we think about spirits that were so pure and so evolved in their journey, we will start gaining a little bit of perspective of the grandiosity, of the importance of those characters and what they are for us, those spirits. So imagine that, since the antiquity, from those spirits, those prophets, including Isaiah, many of those messages or those prophets were somehow preparing us. And they had visions. And they had, visions, and they had those messages that would come from high above. And they will all talk about this important person that would come. And I brought a few of the passages only. Isaiah says that the people who walked in the darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelled in the land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. And he will continue. You have multiplied the nations, increased its joy, as with joy at the harvest. They are glad when they divide the spoil. And since then, there was something about the yoke. Jesus talks about the yoke, right? My yoke is light. My burden is light. For the yoke of its burden and the staff of his shoulders, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of the Messiah. There is so much already being taught to us since back in the day about this man that will come and somehow break the status and confront those powers and share that burden with all of us. And they will continue saying, and that is very powerful, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. So we remember today, many of the scriptures will call Jesus the Son of God. And the government shall be upon his shoulders. Interesting, right? In Spiritism, we call Jesus the governor of the planet. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Let's imagine that back in the day, in Isaiah's time, I'm not a historian, so I don't have any precise information, but it is important to understand that the world was, like in many times during this time, at war. Many wars and conquers. And there were tribes and nations that continue fighting with each other. The tribe of Judah, Israel, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, Jerusalem that already existed back in the time. We're talking about probably 600-700 years before. We are talking about announcing Jesus 700-800 years before his physical appearance. In the time when people were in need. We are being prepared constantly throughout the ages to welcome Jesus in times of need, incredible need, all around the known world. In that time, the psychosphere of the planet. We talk a lot about we are immersed in this fluid, in vibrations, our thoughts, our feelings. Imagine that this happens with us, this happens from the spiritual world. So we can imagine that the preparation of our collective psyche since that time. And when I say that, you may say, Thiago, come on, you're talking the collective psyche of people almost 3,000 years ago. But let's remember, we are here not only looking at life from that existence perspective, but we are talking about life from the perspective of our immortal spirits. The world welcomes us over and over and over throughout many different existences, having different opportunities. And the learnings that happen and the lessons that we learn, we do not forget. So the world is being prepared. Therefore, we are being prepared for centuries and centuries and centuries. Molding our psyche, molding our mentalities, adjusting our expectations, renewing our hopes over and over and over, until we are finally one day able to let this flourish in terms of real attitude change for us. So let's think about, Jesus' role in our humanity and for the planet Earth. And this is how Spiritism will help us to understand who really Jesus is. First of all, if we think about the progression of spirits, this is there in the Spirits book, our foundation. We are spirits in evolution. We go through what the spirits say, a classification of spirits according to our level of evolution, from imperfect, pseudo knowledge, to simple, to more, to start practicing more goodness. So then we are good spirits, we are superior spirits, until what we know so far, the last stage of evolution of a spirit, that is pure spirit. Spirits that were already shed their materiality, that were practicing the good, the charity, putting in perspective the materiality to a point that there is no more influence of matter on their beings. And they finally are able to establish a more direct connection with the divine, with God. Now, not only that, but we know that when spirits reach that level, they start then, let's say, graduate within that category. How do they do that? Well, sometimes we come in families. We welcome a child. We adopt a child. We have partners. We may be responsible for other people, that we have a cause that we dedicate ourselves. Maybe we are responsible for many people that work together with us, and we're responsible to make sure that their existences, their needs are met. And then imagine that in this process of evolution, our tasks also gaining complexity, in number, in importance, to a point that pure spirits will be also responsible to take care of incredibly large collectivities. Can we think about an entire humanity being shepherded by someone? A spirit that is as pure, as capable of helping an entire humanity into evolution. And here, the community of pure spirits that take care and govern our entire planetary system, our entire solar system, come to play and have a very important role in our lives. And it just happens that this spirit, this pure spirit that is known to us today as Jesus, was one day called by God to help to create an entire planet. And taking care of its matter, its place in this solar system, aggregating matter, condensing materials, organizing atoms, molecules, to a point that an entire sphere, a planet, was formed or created. Jesus was assigned to form a planet so spirits could start incarnating in it. So from the formation of the earth, Jesus also presided the development of life. From the tiny little unicell organisms that existed from all the chaotic electromagnetic phenomena that happened on Earth billions and billions and billions of years ago, until the evolution of all the species that led to the creation of what we call today Homo sapiens. And then those spirits that would be ready to incarnate as humans would start incarnating this earth. And from then on, there is an entire path of evolution, of experiences, incarnation over incarnation, that will help those spirits to grow, to evolve, and to also continue that process of perfecting themselves. We are looking at a planet today that is approximately 4.6 billion years old. Those numbers are so difficult for us to understand. And imagine that if a spirit as pure as Jesus received the task to form the earth more than 4.6 billion years ago, Jesus was already, for sure, very, very pure when he received that task. So we are talking about a spirit, and that's what gives us, when we start thinking about how many incarnations do we need to have here? Imagine that likely the solar systems and the planets and the stars where Jesus himself evolved, just like we are doing right now, don't even exist anymore. Jesus was pure 5 billion years ago when he was in charge of the task of helping our planet to exist and us to incarnate. We are part of billions of years of a plan. When the spirits come to us and talk about Jesus and send messages about Jesus and reinforcing the importance of Jesus for us, we are talking about a plan that is very, very difficult for us to even grasp with our minds. How many billions of years? How many spirits under the guidance of Jesus that helped the entire process to happen? And we know more or less through approximately 4 people Jesus' story in depth, more depth, 3 years. And we know more or less 30 years of his existence on earth. But this project of 30 odd years, or actually 3 years of full project of teaching and being with us face to face. Imagine how much effort, time, energy, and preparation it took to happen. Because as a pure spirit, Jesus and many other spirits are finally infallible. Finally, what they do is not subject to failure because of the material constraints and because of what we call temptations. Only after a spirit is as pure as being completely detached from these so-called temptations that they are able to bring to us the sublimity and the importance and the perfection of the message. And when we talk about following Jesus' message, we are talking about looking at a spirit that not only came during those 30 odd years, but is responsible for the incarnations of billions and billions and billions of spirits every single day to this earth. If we think about Jesus brought to us by the Spiritism, if there was any doubt, Allan Kardec, the one who codified the messages and the lessons that became what we know as the Spiritism, he needed to make sure, and he needed to ask the spirits, what is the most perfect being, the perfect standard that God sent to humanity? And the answer could not be clearer. Look at Jesus. Allan Kardec will continue after that question is answered. The question number 625 in the Spirit's book. Allan Kardec will write to us, Jesus is the highest standard of moral perfection. Remember, moral is the action that is the distinctive action between bad and good. The good moral, it is acting according to a code, to the ethics of well-being for you and for others. So Jesus is the highest standard of moral perfection to which humankind may aspire on earth. God offers him as the most perfect model. And the doctrine he taught is the purest expression. Let's listen to it. The purest expression of God's law. Because he was animated by the divine spirit and was the purest being that has ever walked the earth. To dissipate any doubt about the importance of Jesus in our lives, Jesus brought to us many models, many messengers, many teachers, all of them with some level of imperfection. And some of them are still needed to us, because sometimes it is even difficult for us to grasp how pure and perfect Jesus is. Sometimes we need examples that are closer to us so then we can relate. And that's why Jesus surrounded himself while he was on earth by people like you and I, with struggles, with dramas, with difficulties, with incredulities as well. The first picture, the first art in this lecture is one of those examples. Thomas, one of the disciples, when Jesus appears after the so-called resurrection, after Jesus comes back after his discarnation, he needed to show his wounds to the disciples, and Thomas needed to touch it to believe. It's us. It's us. So beyond all the incredulity, Jesus continues teaching us. right? His evolution happened billions of years before even accepting the task to help to form and take care of the earth and all of us. The preparation for his arrival, since the first announcements, the first comings, hundreds, if not thousands of years before his appearance to us. Jesus is what is called, according to the book Evolution into Worlds, a co-creator in higher plane. He is a co-creator. He is the one that receives directly the will of God and executes it. He is a co-creator. But not only that, when we're going to talk a little bit more about then what were those lessons that Jesus brought to us. And powerfully enough, in the same way that Jesus is a co-creator, Jesus calls us also to be co-creators. In our own plane, in our own level, with our own abilities, to be co-creators. Because we are not yet ready to have what the spirits call connected to God in a process of unfathomable communion. But that is the way that we are growing and evolving towards one day having that direct, unfathomable communion with God. So let's think about Jesus' teachings then. Let's think about what is the message that Jesus brings to us. You can ask, Tiago, if it's that important, so then what is he teaching to us? Let's get to the meat of it, right? Let's get to the core of it. Okay, thank you for being patient. Now it is time. First of all, since the Old Testament, with Moses, with Abraham, with many of the other prophets, they bring to us the idea of God. Moses being one of the first ones that helped together with many other, Egyptian civilizations to bring the idea of one only God, monotheism. Before that, many civilizations had the polytheism, believing in many different gods, many of them personification of human traits that would become then the religion. But Moses, remember, he was actually, he grew up and he was raised by the Egyptians. He was adopted, but, and he lived together with the royalties back in the time with the pharaohs. And actually, there were some of those pharaohs that actually adopted monotheism already. So Moses brings to the people who were enslaved in Egypt that idea to prepare our collective psyche for the idea of one and only God. However, that God, and many of us know, if you go to the Old Testament, it is a very vengeful God. It is in many ways a very mean God. It is a God that teaches through punishment and through threats and through intimidation. Because we were brute back then. We needed very concrete examples and models and teachings to help us steer our directions to a better direction of living. Remember, back then, the value of life was very different than what it is today. And we are still struggling a little bit. So let alone thinking about a few thousands of years ago, when the value of life was very different than what it is today. So Jesus comes to us and presents what is called the paternity and maternity of God. Jesus refers to God constantly as Father. So, from that vengeful, threatening God, Jesus brings the infinite love, mercy of God to all its creatures. Not only the God of the elect, not only the God of one nation or another, but God as the Father and Mother and Creator of all beings and all things. And a God that we can establish a relationship with. Through what? What Jesus does constantly when he's talking to God. He goes to a remote place, to the top of a mountain, away from everybody else, and he prays. And the prayer is that conversation, soul to soul, with God. It is the conversation with the spiritual world. It is recognizing our place in this world, in this spiritual world. It is recognizing the paternity and maternity of this God that is all love, all beauty, all perfection, all mercy. That wants the mercy instead of the sacrifice. That wants the growth and happiness of us all. And gives us all the opportunities that we can have in order to grow. And didn't stop giving us one existence, but gives us the eternity. That created us all simple and ignorant, tending to perfection. That is the God that Jesus relates to, and he presents that God to us. And Jesus also, as much as he teaches us about that loving God, he also teaches us about us as loving beings. He presents us to our real selves. He gives us our essence, our spiritual essence. Because as much as he says, let's have that relationship with God, let's then love God as God loves us, he will also say, love one another. Love one another by giving the value to each one's life as we give the value to our own. Love your neighbor as yourself. Every single word crafted by Jesus has a profound meaning to us. And it is not the meaning to us people only. It is not as me, Tiago, or Angelo, or Raquel. It is our spirits that present themselves today as those personas that we all have, but are much more than that because we are immortal. Because the lessons will not end, and because we will have the opportunity to then use the lessons of today, tomorrow, in the next existence and next relationships. But for more than 2,000 years, the message is clear. Love one another. And more, Jesus, close to the end of his own existence, says, love one another as I have loved you. Therefore, we can extract from that the teachings of Jesus are a lesson of love. Whatever Jesus does, he does out of love. Whatever Jesus says, he says out of love. However Jesus looks at us, Jesus gives us a loving look. When the spirits answered Allan Kardec and said, look at Jesus, it is because Jesus is already looking at us with that loving gaze. He sees us for who we will become. He doesn't see us for who we are. He doesn't only see us for who we want to be, he sees us for who we'll become. That is that loving gaze of Jesus to all of us. When he speaks with us, he speaks to the real us that is never going to forget what is being said, that will be beyond our material memory, that will survive the decay of our memories, of our brains, because it will be imprinted in our spirits. He presents the golden rules. On the top of the mount, he tells us constantly, forgive, tolerate, respect, but don't submit. Seek for justice, even if the price is your persecution. Fight for peace, especially where peace is needed. Give value to life as a whole. The earth, each other, everything. And he puts two interesting rules to us that Spiritism helps us to extract from many of Jesus' teachings. That one is called charity and one is called humility. And the interesting thing about humility, it is the antidote against the tendency that we all have, that is still a very primitive tendency. And when you say primitive, it's because, remember, we are part of a process of evolution. Therefore, we already fought to death to survive. We needed to be above. We needed to be superior. But what Jesus is telling us is, let's transcend the animality. Let's transcend the need to be better. Because you are always going to be a son and a daughter of God, after all. Always there will be creatures ahead of you. And always there will be ones that will learn from you. What will they learn? How to be better at any cost, or how to be better than yourself yesterday. Jesus told us, you are gods. We are co-creators. And we also have a place in the creation. Collectively, we grow together, giving and receiving and sharing and learning and teaching. Constantly, incessantly, to the end of times. How did Jesus teach us? It is another interesting way that Jesus teaches us. Jesus back then could not say things in such a direct way because people would not understand. We would not understand. So Jesus brings the metaphors, the symbologies, the parables, right? Because that's how people back then would understand. And the parables and the metaphors and the stories were all related with the life back then. He always talks about shepherds, about sheep, and about sowing seeds, right? Because that was the life in the time. He spoke with fishermen. He spoke with farmers. He spoke with the people in the rural areas. Those were the people who were eager for his teachings. Those were the ancestors and the descendants of the slaves that Moses was trying to release. It was according to understanding that we had and planting the seeds for the future humanity, which undeniably is us. We are being given the opportunity to understand much more of the essence. We are still seeing the flourishing of those seeds everywhere. Right? The gospel according to Spiritism is very, very clear that without a key to understand the meaning of the teachings of the scriptures and Jesus, it would be almost impossible. But Spiritism brings us that understanding of the essence of Jesus' teachings. And Jesus himself finishes that. And that's why I spoke in parables. Imagine that if Jesus could come back and say, that's why it is written there. I helped them to write this down because they wouldn't understand. That was, again, preparing our collective psyche. It is an educational methodology. That's why back then people called Jesus what? Rabbi. Rabbi in Hebrew is master or teacher. Jesus came with an educational methodology. Which education is that? It is the education of the Spirit. The methodology that Jesus has is not a methodology for mortal beings. It is the methodology for the Spirit in evolution. That's how Jesus taught. Not only that, but Jesus continues being with us. Jesus is and continue being the governor of our planet. The most perfect model and guide for all of us today until we are able to, what is called today, regenerate. To be reborn as better spirits. The better us, as we were saying. Perfected. Practicing those lessons. Despite Jesus' departure, he showed us the path of immortality. Because he immortalized himself to all of us. Remember, all his teachings are a lesson. And even after his departure, Jesus comes back to tell us we don't die. We will continue. And he comes back and he shares the space with everybody there back then, the ones that he lived with while incarnated. And he says, hey, we don't die. And to prove, he tells the entire story all over again while with them in spirit. And he continues guiding all the other spirits that continue coming and helping and teaching us. That's what he calls till the end of times. And for those who are still waiting for Jesus, because there is still something that is called his second coming. For us in Spiritism, we understand that he already arrived. And he's already with us because number one, he never left. And number two, if he showed us the path of immortality, he is with us in spirit. Thank you, Raquel. You are redeemed right now. After calling me old, you are redeemed. That's right, in spirit. And not only that, Jesus told us very clearly, keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate. What he called the Spirit of truth that will restore all things and will be with you forever. So, this second coming is then guided by Jesus, the legion of spirits that started showing themselves to us since the mid-1800s, reminding us that life doesn't cease, doesn't end with the end of matter, with the end of our material bodies. That our spirits survive that transition and continue living acting, learning, influencing this life as we influence the other life. That our essence is not material, that our essence is spiritual. All of this under the guidance of Jesus, the Christ. Jesus never left us, and he continues working in many different ways with all of us. And the Spiritism today, and that's why we dedicate ourselves so much to Spiritism, because the Spiritism has a task to restore the essence of the message of Jesus. For us today, restoring those messages that one day we learn as parables, as symbologies, as stories, to become every day more and more concrete in our own actions of every day. And it is relevant because more than ever we need tolerance, we need respect, we need forgiveness, we need justice. We need what he called righteousness. We need to follow the right path. We have every single example, good and bad, today. It is time for us to act according to God's laws. The law of love, the law of charity, the law of justice, the law of evolution, the law of society, the law of freedom, that are all natural, all godly, divine, and live within us. Because we all know every time that we stray away from that, it is difficult to sleep. Every day that we get back to it, we feel lighter, we feel better. We know that. Nobody needs to know because we do, and our pillows do. We know how much it weighs on us. Because it is that inner calling. That's what we say, the divine within us, that is calling us for that path. It is our conscience that is guiding us. Jesus already said, if somebody tells you the kingdom of heaven is here or there, don't believe them, because the kingdom of heaven is within us. That's where our paradise, our heaven is, as well as the other places. Let's think about the good ones. And finally, on the road to a city called Emmaus, after it was known back then that Jesus had resuscitated, as they say, his body was not in the tomb. Where is it? The angels speak with the women, Mary Magdalene, with Mary, Jesus' mother, with the cousins, Martha. The angels say, he's not here. He has risen, as we say. Jesus discarnates, but then returns in spirit. And in the road to this city, there were two of his disciples walking and just talking about what just happened, right? Probably imagine what happened after that faithful Friday, the procession that goes to the mount, to the Calvary, and everybody's just still in disbelief. And then suddenly this other man starts walking with them and say, what are you talking about? And they say, have you heard what happens? And they talked about Jesus. And they talked about this man that they say, this man, he was a man of God. He was a good man. And he was put away. And then he listens to those two. And they didn't realize that it was Jesus. Because just like us, so many times, in these times of difficulty, we don't realize that we are never alone. And then, not only that, but he meets the others. He meets the other disciples and his apostles. And when he meets them, some still in disbelief, he asks for food. He shows his wounds. And not only that, he comes back in spirit and teaches them, confirming all the lessons all over again, which is one of the most important teachings of Jesus, that he needed to really have it in symbolic way. Even though he had a very, very heart-to-heart conversation with the priest Nicodemus, still we didn't get, which is the reincarnation. The reincarnation as a law. And he comes back and he continues teaching the disciples. And finally, before he leaves for good as a visible being, but not away from us ever, he looks at the disciples and he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore. And he transfers part of this responsibility, right? Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, which means help people to really take the story and recognize that story as true, as real, and that baptism as the understanding that we are listening with the Spirit. Teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of age. And then he goes to continue. And he continues until today. And we hope that that little snippet of what Jesus is for us can help us to continue doing our best and to live in the world today with more perseverance, with more hope, not despairing, and making sure that the steps that we give matter for today and for always to the end of age. Thank you. All right. No questions. Or I did a good job or I did a very bad one. Nobody understood absolutely anything. But if you didn't understand anything, go back there and start reading just like I did. Because it is worth it. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chuck, again for the lecture today. And we want to thank all of you that was with us over the internet, and hoping to see you here next weekend, next Sunday.